Hi, this is Fraser Hines, Jamie McCrimmon from Doctor Who, and you're listening to Nerdology.
Hi, this is Mark, and welcome to episode 44 of Nerdology, and I'm joined today by friend of the show, it's Lindsey. Hey, Lindsey.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
Good.
We are going to take a bit of time out to have a look at an old Doctor Who episode. So I think last time we spoke, one of the things I mentioned I really enjoy is getting people to watch an old Doctor Who they haven't seen before and sort of try and experience it through their eyes. And I find that quite an interesting way of looking at it for something that's, you know, quite familiar to me, to have somebody else see it and hear their thoughts on it. So we had a bit of a chat, and I came up with the 1967 Patrick Troughton story, The Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yes, which I had not seen.
No.
Along with most of... what are we calling it these days? Is it Legacy?
I think there's classic Who is
classic
what they
Doctor
tend to
Who,
say.
yeah.
It's all one big thing, though, isn't it? You know, right
Of
the way,
course it is.
you know, Pat from Hartnell through to Jodie Whittaker. It's all one big story, really.
Yeah,
As far
absolutely.
as I'm concerned, anyway. But there you go. So, first thoughts.
I actually really enjoyed it.
Mhm. It's very much of its time.
It is, and I think... Well, I'm sure we'll discuss some of the elements that result from this, but I am very aware of the fact that you have to enjoy something for what it is.
Yeah.
I could compare it to, you know, a modern Cyberman episode.
Yeah.
But at certain stages, that ceases to be valuable because actually, it's what it is. It was made in an era when Doctor Who did stories that had 4-episode arcs, or 6, or 8. And yeah, you know, visual effects and costuming were not what they are now.
No.
And there's also some slight stereotyping of several
No,
groups.
really? No,
But I'm sure we'll come to that.
we'll get on to that. So, this features Patrick Troughton as the second version of Doctor Who, and his companions for this story are Fraser Hines playing Jamie McCrimmon and Deborah Watling playing Victoria Waterfield. This is her first trip proper in the TARDIS. So she was introduced in the previous story, which is called Evil of the Daleks, which sadly no longer exists in its entirety. There are one or two episodes knocking around of that, but so this is her first trip in the TARDIS. We had to say this story, up until the early 90s, was missing from the archive. So it was broadcast in September 67, and the BBC, possibly without realising the value of these sorts of programmes back at the time and the sheer cost of videotape archives and what have you, they tended to, once the repeats had gone out, they would wipe the tapes and then use them again. So this was thought to be lost for the best part of 30 years, and then thanks to the BBC sending out film copies to various countries around the world, this was located in Hong Kong, I seem to remember, at Rediffusion. So it came back to the BBC archive in 1992.
There's something wonderful about that, though, and I know it must be incredibly frustrating, particularly for completionists, to know that there is Doctor Who out there that they haven't seen. But for me, I feel like there's almost something kind of magical about it.
Yeah.
Particularly the idea that other bits might still be found.
Yeah, there's a real... Is it nerdy to say there's a real romance about it? It's just...
No, I get that.
You have this image in your mind of what they must be like, and we're quite lucky within Doctor Who that because there were such big fans back in the day, every single episode exists in audio form because people would record the TV. So even if it doesn't exist as a television program, you can still listen to it, and fans do something called reconstructions, where they'll take photos that were taken from the TV screen and sort of create a slideshow along with the soundtrack to give you the impression of what it might have been like. So you've got that to sort of fall back on if you want to go back and see these stories. But yeah, to see this back and complete was quite a big deal back in the day.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I like that as an insight into fandom and how fandom changes. I am young enough, which is not a phrase I often get to say. I'm young enough that, for as long as I was really into things, there was the capacity to record them off the TV.
Yeah.
There's a very funny story about my parents having to acquire a video cassette player because I was going to miss an episode of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Wow.
Because I had to go to a nativity rehearsal and I was very upset about it.
So on the back of that, they just went out and bought a video recorder.
I don't know that it was quite that simple, but from my perspective as quite a young child, that was how it happened. I think it might have been the impetus to do something my dad had been itching to do for some time.
Oh, for God's sake, just get a video recorder. She won't stop whining about it.
No, I'm sure I was angelic and just very distracted.
Yeah, just very, very,
Absolutely. But yeah, no, I love that kind of the lengths fans will go to, and then how they interact with the material when it doesn't exist. I have been known to dabble in fan fiction, and for me that is kind of an equivalency in that you're looking at something that doesn't exist or that you're hinted at, or quite often, particularly in Doctor Who, to be fair, I haven't dabbled in Doctor Who fan fiction, but there's a lot of, we've just finished this adventure, but we haven't told you anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're up to speed or if you've heard of, there's a company called Big Finish who make audio plays, and they have the license to do Doctor Who, and they set stories in those gaps in between the ones that are on the TV. So, it's helpful for them that you've got these gaps, because then they can come up with interesting new stories. Anyway, back to Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yeah, sorry. I was about to go into the line between official productions and fanfic. But yeah.
Oh, no, go on.
No. I think that line is lovely, and I think Big Finish is a really good example of where it exists. Because I know that there are, there's a lot of the creators in the Doctor Who world are very much fans.
Yeah.
And that meeting a point of where somebody gets a license and it is official versus somebody just kind of doing it out of love, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, back to Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yeah, so this is, if I remember right, this is the Cybermen's third outing.
Okay.
So, you have this, to set the scene, you have this expedition, don't you? Which is like an Earth expedition. These moneyed types are getting... There
were some interesting challenges, I think, coming into this blind. Because obviously, I picked up quite quickly that this was Victoria's first story, or that she had just kind of arrived on the TARDIS. And I know about Jamie, like I knew he existed.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of professional Scots.
Oh.
However, other than that, so that was quite good. This isn't.
I think he has got Scottish lineage.
Oh, absolutely.
But
so do most of the SNP, but they kind of turn it into a party trick. Why is he wearing a kilt? Like, why? Like,
well, by all accounts, he in his first story, which is called The Highlanders, he had a much softer sort of Highland accent, because he was only going to be a one-off character, and then they decided to offer him a recurring role. So then it kind of morphed into a sort of generic Scots accent, and then after a while, the fact that he was from the time of the Battle of Culloden just seemed to be completely irrelevant. He was just a lad travelling with a doctor.
Fair enough. In any case, so that was kind of, it's quite interesting kind of being sort of bounced into an episode like that, not really knowing that. I didn't want to go and look too much into it, so I didn't kind of go and figure out where they were in the kind of arc or anything. I've seen Patrick Troughton in the War Games, and I quite like him. I think he has all of the things that I associate with Doctor. Like, he could be serious, he's got a bit of joviality about him, so there's a bit of a wicked sense of humour at a couple of stages. And he's clearly intelligent, and he kind of plays that quite well. He plays off people well.
He's quite, well, I wouldn't say Machiavellian, but he has this ability to disarm people by appearing to be a bit of a buffoon, but all the while in the background he knows exactly what's going on, and he's going to do whatever it takes to sort it out.
Yeah, and I think you see that in most of the contemporary Doctors, just in different extents and in different ways. So whether they play the puppy dog or whether they play like, the disarming charming or the slightly eccentric, they all kind of play on that to a greater or lesser extent.
Just going off on a bit of a tangent. So you're not so keen on professional Scots. What do you make of David Tennant and his accent as the Doctor?
I think it was a choice that they made. I'm not particularly bothered by it. I think particularly because we did get Peter Capaldi.
Yes,
so it's not like the Doctor wasn't ever a Scot, that they decided that he shouldn't be a Scot.
And we've had Sylvester McCoy as well, he was Scottish.
Yes. I'm not particularly familiar with Sylvester McCoy in his Doctor Who enactment. I've seen him live at the festival a couple of times, which was fascinating. Both he and Robert Picardo, who plays the EMH in Star Trek Voyager, came and did something as part of a little group that was fascinating. Anyway, sorry, that was very much tangent.
Sorry, I'm diverting you off here.
You're absolutely fine. So this whole bit kind of started because you spoke about like this Earth mission. So as somebody who is not particularly familiar with classic Who, it took me several minutes to decide whether they were supposed to be on an alien planet or on Earth.
Well, it does look a little bit like a quarry, doesn't it?
Well, yes, but also I knew that was how they would have filmed it. So like, it wasn't that I was like, oh, this is rubbish because I can't tell. But I was genuinely not sure whether they were supposed to be kind of in Egypt or somewhere like Egypt, and they were going to find like a pyramid and a tomb, because that's what I thought of when I thought of tombs. Or whether they were on an alien planet. And then I saw a rocket, and then I was a bit more sure, but then I wasn't really sure. And then I had no idea of when it was set. So I there wasn't a level of like what I would take. There weren't cues for what I would take to be future.
Okay.
So I was like, so is this?
Well, surely the rate of inflation when the character Kaftan says she'll give £50 to the first man who can open the doors at the tomb. I mean, surely that would have given you a bit of an inside look at
the fact that they're
how far into the future we were.
Well, yeah, precisely. So yeah, I found that was probably the hardest thing for me throughout the whole episode, was trying to understand, are these all human? Are they on Earth? Are they not on Earth? When are we? And to be fair, to a certain extent, most of that didn't really matter.
No.
But it did disarm me to begin with. I wasn't quite sure what I was watching.
Okay. And what did you make of that sort of cast of guest characters?
So to begin with, I was remarkably impressed by the diversity of the cast of characters, because there was quite a lot of them, but B, they weren't all white, and they weren't all male. I was like, oh, okay, that was better than I was expecting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think. So we've said that it's not really. You've got to be careful how you compare classic Who with modern Who, but. Like, there is a bit of me that goes, so if this was modern Who, you would lose half the extraneous characters. You would... There were quite a lot of bits that I was like, you could tighten that up, and turn this into, like, a two-parter, maybe. Or maybe an episode, given how long the actual episodes are, because they're only sort of 25 minutes or so, aren't they?
Yeah.
But yes, so there were one or two bits where I was like, do we actually need all these people? But no, I was genuinely kind of quite impressed with them. There was some good back and forth. I thought they didn't do too bad a job of trying to like set the scene without
labouring the point too much.
Yeah. So, I get everything straight off, but actually you pick it all up, and that's what's important. I thought the actual... So once they stopped wandering around amongst the kind of dunes and the hills, and they blew the thing up, I was like, oh, that was actually, you know what, the graphic wasn't bad. They blew the thing up. I was like, okay, I'll take that.
Yeah.
The reveal of the actual doors of the thing was quite funny.
Yeah. Quite a precise explosion, wasn't it?
It was a very precise explosion.
Yeah.
But I will give them that.
Yeah.
And the actual doors were really interesting. It was the first kind of... stylistic thing that I had seen.
Yeah, almost not quite a hieroglyph, but that kind of
Yeah.
Almost like a corporate logo.
But I quite enjoyed that, and I quite enjoyed the fact that, so what I'm seeing are things that I've noticed in contemporary Who, modern Who,
Yeah.
that clearly come from further back, because obviously
Yeah.
we see kind of iconography associated with the Cybermen at various stages, and while it's not the same, it's a nod to the fact that this is something that happens.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting.
And, I mean, we've talked about the diversity. There is a bit of an elephant in the room, or more than one elephant, if we're honest.
Yes. So we have a strapping, beautiful black man who appears to be there as muscle.
Yeah,
and
so
as
he's
a slave,
Toberman. He's played by
effectively.
Roy Stewart. He appears in a later Doctor Who, a John Pertwee. And unfortunately, he gets equally not particularly well served in that one either, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, as in, I am not an expert on this subject by any stretch, but it did stand, like, it struck me very much as something that I wouldn't expect to see today, and if I did, I would call it out.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, it is of its era.
Yeah. And you've got the two sort of, for want of a better word, baddies. The main bad guys are the character of Eric Klieg, who's played by George Pastel, who'd been in quite a few sort of fairly high-profile films prior to this, and character of Kaftan, played by Shirley Cooklin. Now, you may or may not be aware, she was the wife of the producer at the time, which I'm sure was just completely coincidental.
Yes, I am absolutely sure that is the case. It's difficult because these things do happen, and they happen in other shows as well. I'm sure there's several Star Trek stories whereby there's like, oh, this person was dating one of the producers when they mysteriously got a part in the show.
There is a small degree of, well, maybe I'm just maybe I'm sensitive to it, I don't know, but it does come across a little bit like, oh, they're a bit foreign, they're not to be trusted.
Yes, I think the fact that it then transpires that all of the people who turn out to be particularly unhelpful over the course of the story are not your traditional upstanding.
Although, that said, Toberman does get that sort of...
Toberman excluded. He does, but he is very much treated as a kind of tool. Like, even when the Doctor follows him down, like, he goes first. And I'm like, I don't associate the Doctor with somebody who would send somebody in before them. And, like, he is very much being used as a tool. He's been like, don't you want to get these people back? Look what they've done. That didn't ring particularly comfortably with me. So while the Doctor absolutely does manipulate people, I don't associate them with somebody who would, send somebody into danger as their shield. So I think we can't change how it was made. We can acknowledge that there were problems with it, but I think you have
to try and take it on its own terms as much as you possibly can.
Yeah. And like I said, there are various things where I'm like, so the American crew of the spaceship, or the crew of the spaceship,
in
who I
inverted
think
commas,
were
American.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that, because somebody made me watch this on the premise that I was getting Clive Merrison.
Well,
One,
I thought that
really
knowing...
And two, he was pretending to be an American, and that is not what I enjoyed from Clive Merison.
But come on, this is a performance you might not have otherwise seen.
I didn't really see it, because it didn't really exist, but yeah.
Well, all right, okay.
Yeah, no, I will say that. And you know what? That wasn't the only reason I was doing it, so it's fine.
I thought that might reel you in, though, seeing as you're a bit of a Holmes fan.
Do, and I love Mr. Merrison. He makes a very good Holmes. But he does have quite a distinctive voice, so I spent quite a lot of time trying to listen out for him. I was like, where is he? Where is he? Yes. So I think... So I was quite impressed by the diversity on the screen, but then I think the way that was then used is slightly problematic. So Kaftan was much more independent, and she kind of at least had a bit of... She wasn't always doing what she was told to do. There was much more kind of two-way going on there, which was good. Victoria made me crazy.
She has a habit of doing that. I mean, in fairness... You have to think about it. She's come from Victorian England, and she's now in the future. And
only clue I had to that was the fact that she was wearing a period dress.
Yeah.
But
did you like the line? I think they improvised it between Fraser Hines and Patrick Troughton when she comes out and she says, "Oh, what do you think of my skirt? It's not too short, is it?" And he says, "Oh no, look at Jamie's."
Yeah, no, I am. So if she's supposed to have been Victorian, because I wasn't sure she was,
Yeah.
then the fact that she goes from wearing full Victorian garb to like a short skirt and knee boots or whatever it is she's wearing, I found that slightly odd. So I kind of chose to move past that. Yeah. She kind of vacillates though from being entirely pathetic to being, oh wait a minute, I can do this thing. No, we must do this thing. Oh, but I don't know how to do this thing, so I've got to get a man to do this thing for me. And again, it's a sign of a time, and I am also like I'm embedded enough in the Who fandom, and I've heard commentaries on various episodes and things like that. So I'm aware of the fact that, particularly with the female companions, there were many issues.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is completely on track with how I feel about that character. That said, I think there is a really nice, almost like a family dynamic between the Doctor and Victoria and Jamie.
Yeah, I do enjoy the fact that there is some criticism of contemporary Who where the Doctor's relationship with some of the companions, some people feel like, is too close to like romance or too close to like whatever. That, like, I'm not particularly keen to see the Doctor hooking up, but I'm not particularly bothered by flirtations or camaraderie or anything like that. But I did enjoy that very kind of innocent relationship there was. Yeah,
there's that beautiful scene, isn't there, where they're sitting, it's just a quiet moment, and they're talking about the Doctor's family, and he talks about how if he really wants to see them, he can see them in his mind. I think that's a really nice scene.
And again, it's a good reminder for me that those kind of moments of like deepness that we sometimes get in contemporary Who are also there in the old Who. There is a history of that they're building on. Yeah. If I'm being at all skeptical, there are one or two moments where I'm like, oh, this makes me slightly creepy, because it's a more mature man clearly taking advantage of the innocence of a young woman.
Wow, hang on a minute.
Well, like not in a kind of you're clearly a perv way, but there are moments whereby he's like, oh no, Victoria, I really need you to do this for me. Oh no, it's very important that you do this. And it's the combination of his confidence and her naivety, I think. It just sets something, like not horrifically, but there was one or two moments where I was like, I will not live in that. But that is certainly not a trait, I'm sure, that is solely attributable to this iteration of the Doctor. So there they are. From what I understand, Jamie is kind of there as the muscle.
Yeah, he's quite gung-ho, isn't he?
Yeah, he's, let me get at them kind of thing. The kilt does really irritate me. I suppose, like, if he's coming from like a proper period whereby a sort of an old school kilt might have been worn, he might have been.
He wears it the whole way through. He's one of the longest serving companions, and he wears it right the way through. So it must have been really quite skanky by the time he finished. I mean,
I'd like to think they might have cleaned it.
Yeah,
it's possible to clean these things. But yeah, no, I think he wasn't. I didn't find him particularly irksome. But
that's good.
He was clearly
faint
there.
Praise.
He was clearly there, like the muscle / foil. Like some of the jokes were clearly like that was kind of his role. But yeah, that's good as a kind of combination. I thought they hit quite a lot of different points. So hopefully, yeah, they're a kind of good balance. They're a good team.
Yeah, I think the when they get further into Patrick Troughton's run in the role, when Victoria leaves, there's a new female companion called Zoe, who is from the future. So you got a slightly different dynamic there, and she's like a computer genius. And I think that for me is my favourite sort of time team from his era. I think they work particularly well together.
That sounds more promising.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. She still ends up having to scream a lot, and it's we're not making huge leaps and bounds, but at least they credit her with some intelligence, which is always
and
a bonus.
There's certainly now there is a lot of discussion about each Doctor's reincarnation or regeneration, even being a sort of a consequence of like a reaction to the incarnation that is coming to an end.
Yeah, I think that's always been the case, really.
Yeah,
I mean, certainly the first time round. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I think that's also true of the companions sometimes.
Yeah.
So if the writers have suddenly realised that they've created this character that they've put this limitation on, they suddenly go, actually, it would be really good if we could do this very differently, or this kind of take it on a different direction.
Yeah, there's a companion in the first series of John Pertwee. They have a character called Liz Shaw, who is a professor, and she is an equal to the Doctor.
Oh wow!
So it's very, very much a break from the screaming sort of girl that has to be rescued all the time, and she's really beloved by a lot of fandom. But she lasted for one series, mainly because the actress became pregnant, so she had to obviously take a break from acting anyway. But I think the production team decided that they weren't happy that there wasn't that much of a foil, and they wanted a slightly different character. So the next one that comes after her is she's a bit ditzy. She's brilliant. The character's called Jo Grant. She's played by Katie Manning. She's a real force of nature, a really lovely lady.
She's kind of renowned for screaming, though, isn't she?
Yeah, and she's a bit
twisting
ditzy,
ankles,
but she's really plucky. So she's incredibly brave. She perhaps isn't, as book smart as the previous one, but she's got a lot of guts, and she's not afraid to get stuck in. But she can be a bit screamy, and so obviously I think they decided to go back to that. And then, as you say, as a reaction to that, they then introduced Sarah Jane Smith, who's the next one to take over. So she is I think their first real attempt to have a more feminist approach to casting a female role. So she was a reporter, and she was much more sort of, I don't know, she was a far more
intellectually independent.
Yeah, yes. Very well put.
So I think thank you. It's a fluke, I promise. So I think it's really interesting to see that arc, and I think what we see time and again with anything that we enjoy is that you can call out the challenges, which we have clearly done, while still acknowledging that there are things that they are doing better than other people were at the same time.
Yeah.
So here we are, and that's what we have. So they're standing in front of the tomb with where we'd got to, I believe.
Yeah. So there's electrocutions a go, and I think the Doctor, if I remember, manages to open the doors without getting killed.
Yes.
And then there's all that business with the controls, isn't there, where he's trying to make out that he hasn't got a clue how to open it, and all along, he knows what he's doing, and he's just
doing just enough to make it interesting.
Yeah.
And I quite enjoy that. And again, that's something that I recognise as a characteristic of the Doctor, that kind of bumbling, let me just, well, maybe. Oh, it hasn't worked. What a shame.
So what did you make of the Cybermen?
So there are two elements to this. So the first is that I understand that a lot of people are very fond of this iteration of the Cybermen. And that I can understand why, and I can understand why when it was created. Yeah,
it's quite an iconic design.
It absolutely is. The other part is that they look slightly ridiculous.
No, I thought you were going to come on to something else, which is the voice.
The voice is quite hard to interpret.
Yeah.
I couldn't decide if that was just me, but
No,
it's
the
not
first time I watched it, I was
easiest.
like, oh, I'm going to have to put on the subtitles. I can't.
Yeah. No, I got most of it. It's like many things, you kind of tune in and you can pick it up more easily. So there are a couple of things. So yeah, like silver welly boots and silver onesies does not make a tip. They kind of look like they're wearing socks on their heads. I don't know why. Anyway. So there was that element. And that, like I say, I did enjoy this episode, and you kind of just have to put that to one side.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that you have to put to one side is the fact that in this massive hive in the Tomb of the Cybermen, there were, I think, 9 Cybermen.
Yeah, I mean,
and
obviously
just...
they're working to a budget. I personally think the Tomb set looks really good.
Yeah, I think so too. And the fact that, you get that scene of them breaking out, I think is really good. And there were various points whereby you're like, you didn't see the action, or you just kind of have to believe that there are thousands of these sets of 9 that are all coming out simultaneously, which clearly wasn't happening. The cyber controller.
Yes, this is the first time that character's been introduced.
Yes. So obviously the cyber controller is something that I have come across before. I'm not quite sure what was going on with their head. It was like some kind of weird glass brain thing, maybe.
Yeah, it probably doesn't show up quite so well on screen, but I've actually seen that prop in real life, and it's got lights inside it, and it's meant to glow, but I'm not sure that really came off quite as well on screen as they intended.
No, I don't think so. So that was quite interesting, and because I've been aware of a cyber controller, like logically, I think I always assumed there must be a cyber controller. But maybe that's so to cross fandoms for a second.
Go on.
So obviously the Borg are something that I am more familiar with.
Oh yeah, that was an interesting and unique idea, wasn't it? The Borg.
Yeah. And to be fair, I don't think Star Trek would ever say that they were unique, because you see them in various stages. But one of the massive controversies with the Borg is that a lot of people feel like the concept of having a Borg queen kind of almost counterintuitively destroyed the nature of the Borg, because if they were designed to be, a hive mind, then why would you need somebody that was kind of at the centre of that?
Yeah, I can kind of see that logic.
For me, maybe it's just a leap of logic too far for me, this idea that you could have an entity without a figurehead. Like, I believe that the figurehead could be replaced.
Yeah.
But the idea that you wouldn't need something.
Well, you look at nature and things like beehives, you have the workers and what have you, and then you've got the queen at the centre of it.
Yeah, so I think even before we came across the idea of a cyber controller in New Who, or Modern Who, or whatever, I kind of think I probably always assumed that there was somebody behind it somewhere.
Yeah.
Whether that person had set this all up and then died a fiery death eaten by their own monsters.
Well, you need to see the invasion, because they take it up another notch. They've got the cyber planner. And it looks a bit like a sort of novelty chocolate fountain with spinning things.
Okay, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's maybe I've oversold it to you. I don't want you to be disappointed when you see it, but
it's going to be Clive Merson all over again. But what I didn't realise had a history in Who was the Cybermats.
Yeah, so this is their first outing as well.
I was like, oh, look at them.
They're so cute,
actually, they are, and they're quite impressive. Like, of all the effects, I think those might be some of my favourite.
Yeah, they do a few different variations, don't they? So they've got some that are very obviously just being pulled along on string, and some that are, I guess,
but even the ones that are being pulled along on string, they do it very well.
Yeah. No, I think they're...
So I'm willing to give them that,
cute.
I think. They are. Yeah. They do look quite cute. The bit where it falls apart a little bit is when they attack people, and then it is plainly like an actor holding a cybermat at their neck and going, ah! I wasn't entirely sure what they were doing to the people other than making them scream. But still. There was quite a lot of gun action in this as well.
Yeah.
There was quite a lot of shooty.
Mm-hmm. Which is not really typically what you tend to think of as Doctor Who, really. Although there are vast
and
swathes of the 1980s where it turned into something like akin to the Terminator, but
I am
try not to
aware
talk
that the
about
fact that the idea that the Doctor doesn't use guns is very much a wrong idea, or at least
well,
it's a new idea.
it varies depending story to story whether he does or not.
There's nothing like a bit of continuity. I do love that.
No.
However, nothing will ever beat the continuity that I discovered. Sorry, this is a massive tangent.
Go on.
I once read a Murder She Wrote novel.
Right.
For reasons we will not go into. But I've watched quite a lot of Murder She Wrote. Quite enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Quite like Jessica Fletcher. Quite like that's awful. Whatever the actress's name is. But in this novel, it kind of opens with her driving her car, and I'm like, but she doesn't drive. That's the whole point.
Oh.
Like, she's always like getting on trains and getting lifts from people. That's kind of like a thing.
Angela Lansbury.
That's the one. So
I've met
anyway,
her.
ooh, check you.
Yeah.
That's definitely one to take off the list. But yes, no, that was the worst case of like lack of continuity in the first like 3 lines of a book.
Well, if I'd started reading it, I would have just thrown it straight out the window, frankly.
To be fair, that probably would have been a better use of time because it was horrific. Anyway, so it makes some of the Star Trek novels and some of the Torchwood novels that I have read look like masterpieces.
Wow.
Yeah, that says quite a lot, doesn't it?
That makes me want to read it now.
I'll send it to you in the post.
Oh, thank you very much.
I could have read somewhere.
I can always post a link on the show notes.
No, nobody
Or not,
deserves
as the case
that.
may be.
Anyway, where were we? Yeah, so guns and things. So one of the bits that I was like, I don't know that I really understand. It wasn't the cleanest kind of component, was the bit where they're being hypnotized, but it's actually a firing range for testing something, and in a tomb. It didn't hang quite logically correctly.
No, it's a bit of a strange one, really. I've never really quite understood the logic. I've always, thing is, when you grow up with it, you just kind of, when you're a small child and you're reading the novelization or you're listening to the audio, you tend to just kind of go along with it. But it's when you come to sit down and watch it for something like this, you start to sort of analyze it a bit more, and you think, well, why would they have a firing range in a tomb?
But like logically, and sometimes you just have to suspend these things because, as a fan of Star Trek and of Doctor Who and all sorts of other things, you sometimes just have to acknowledge that that's just what, clearly it was there for a plot device because they needed a cliffhanger for the end of episode 1, and also it allowed them to put more weapons into the conversation.
Yeah.
That might, threaten the Cybermen.
And you just know, as soon as you see a massive sort of fridge stroke cupboard with a Cyberman shaped form in it, you just know someone's going to get shut in there, don't you?
You do. I was like...
And we all know who it's going to be. Yes,
absolutely. In a skirt that didn't really facilitate that.
Not
either.
Really, no.
Bless her. I was like... Somebody didn't think this through. A, her legs are too short for that, and B, she's wearing a skirt. So I can't imagine it was very comfortable. Again, it's echoes of things that I recognise in terms of conversion chambers and things like that. There was a bit of me that was looking at that going, knowing what the Cybermen of this era look like, being like, so what do they do in there? Do they pour liquid resin over you to make your suit? What's going on?
I think they say they get re-energized or something in there, don't they? So
yeah, but as a concept, it wasn't very surprising that somebody did in fact get stuck in it. And I particularly enjoyed that bit where was it Kaftan who's like, somebody's like, did you pull that lever? And she's like, no. No, I definitely didn't. And they're like, come and help me get her out. And she's like, oh, I can't open the door. Yes, but I can't decide.
I think for me personally, when you're watching these, some stand up better than others, but I think what keeps my interest right the way through is Patrick Troughton's performance. I think he is so mesmeric. I just you can't take your eyes off him when he's on the screen. I think he's probably in some respects a bit too good for a kids show, but it was just brilliant casting. I
see exactly where you're coming from, but I think for me the quality of an actor is in how valid they can make whatever they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a good kind of versatility and an ability to bring different components into a character is really key.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true whether it's kids shows or adult shows, because I think sometimes we forget how perceptive children are.
Yeah.
And like they don't really like bad acting any more than the rest of us. They might like more caricature, but actually bad acting doesn't sell.
No.
So yeah, it's all good fun.
What did you make of the music in this? Because they like to use a bit of stock music. There's a theme that they play when the Cybermen are breaking out of their tombs, and it's been used on a couple of occasions before. It's quite interesting, that sort of music concrete, that kind of experimental music. I really like it. I think it's
I wasn't
different.
Particularly aware of it, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah.
So I didn't go, oh my gosh, this is awful. Like, as in, it was quite heavy-handed. Like the music cues were clearly kind of like bam, bam, bam. Yeah. But that's what I would expect.
Yeah. Well, bear in mind also at this time they, for a lot of the older serials, they don't really have a dedicated composer. So not too far after this, they have a dedicated composer who actually creates the score to the story, whereas for a lot of the older ones they're actually using stock music,
like tension music,
or
like
I think it fits
romance music
pretty well.
It does.
Yeah, I think it's, when you think at the time this was going out, like the number one album on the UK charts was Sgt. Pepper.
Oh, wow.
And you had the likes of, because I had a little look around to see what was going on at this time, Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd was in the top 10 as well, and Jimi Hendrix. So it's quite a sort of experimental time musically. So I suppose it kind of chimes with that in a slightly more filmic way.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy for us to be slightly rude about kind of stock music. But actually, when you think about it, like all of our favourite characters and our favourite stories, or like, there will be music cues that we associate with them. So another massive tangent. I've been to see Downton Abbey recently.
Right.
And it was lovely, and it was exactly what you would expect it to be, like not earth-shattering or life-changing or, the greatest piece of cinema ever. However, it was lovely. But one of the things that I was very aware of was that I was like, oh, and this is peril music, and this is somebody might be going to jail music, and this is romance music.
Boris Johnson.
Maybe. I wish. There were, but that was very much kind of like, that was what brought you back to it. It was what made it feel like what it was. So I think, key themes, perhaps more artistically woven, are definitely still de rigueur.
So, in terms of, because I know you said you've seen a bit of Old Who, how would you rate this alongside what you've seen so far?
I would rate this pretty highly, possibly because I paid more attention to it. I'm quite bad for putting things on in the background and then kind of drifting.
Yeah, my wife's very much like that, but
I multitask. But that for me, I enjoyed it. I think the fact that it was 4 episodes and not 8, I think probably helped.
That was one thing I kind of thought about when I thought about imposing this on you. I didn't really want to give you anything too lengthy.
And the other end of that is that if I were watching it today, then I would expect, like, the pacing feels slow. But that's like I say, in the space of 4 episodes. So 4 episodes are 2 hours. It's not too bad, but I think I've struggled with some of the other.
I suppose what you have to remember
serials
is that this was meant to be, this is going to be seen once. This was broadcast on Saturday evening on BBC One, on a weekly thing, and once you'd seen the story, that was it, and you were just watching it episode to episode. Yeah,
and we're just used to different things now. Like the pace of life is faster, the pace of TV is certainly faster.
Oh yeah.
So, joking aside, Clive Merson and his mate in The Rocket probably wouldn't have ever been in a
Which is a real
contemporary
shame.
show. Well, I'm not really sure they added a lot. other than coming in and saving Victoria when she couldn't flip a lever.
Well,
Because
she's only a girl after
it's
all.
a man's job.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, oh, I can't remember which one they flipped, so let me get people who weren't in the room when it happened to go into it for me. However, admitting one's shortcomings is a good skill. That's not necessarily bad.
No.
So yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. Like I say, I haven't seen a lot. I've seen the War Games, and I've seen some of Peter Davidson's first episode.
Oh yeah.
Which I can't remember the name of. But I think he spends quite a lot of it like in a container being carried around
It's called
by people.
Castrovalva.
That's the one. And I quite enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And I've watched, is it the Three Doctors?
Mm-hmm.
One of the collaborative ones.
There's a few multi-doctor ones, yeah.
Yeah, it's either Three Doctors or Five Doctors, something like that. And I quite enjoyed that as well. I do love a team up. Team ups are like one of my favourite things.
Yeah, and it's they're I think, obviously I can't speak for all fandom, but I think they do tend to be fan favourites.
Yeah, and they're
Just the
rare.
nostalgia factor, and yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've got to enjoy that. So I loved the 50th anniversary special.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the things I enjoyed so much was seeing different doctors kind of interacting with each other, kind of playing off each other.
Yeah.
And I think they did that particularly well in that instance.
No, I think they did. Yeah. Oh, when you've got an actor of the standing of John Hurt coming in, you know, it's,
precisely.
Half the work's already done, isn't it?
It is. But one of the things that I love about Doctor Who is that you do get people who are renowned, like sticking their head up and being like, "Oh, I'll totally do this."
Yeah.
Either because they love the show, or because they understand the value of it, or because they think it's going to be some fun, and all of those things are perfectly valid.
Yeah.
I think sometimes being British allows us to recognise more faces. And I think that's really interesting. And, you know, it is lovely when you see someone like Clive Merrison, you're like, oh, bless your little cotton socks. This is like the casualty of the 60s.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Or the Bill, yeah, do you remember the Bill?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, any actor worth their salt would have been on that at least twice.
Usually as a bad guy and a good guy.
Yeah. Not necessarily in the same episode, but yeah.
Oh, no. But, you know, that's it, isn't it?
So are we going to rate this, or...?
I would rate it, I don't know, maybe 4 out of 5 for classic Who. And maybe 3 out of 5 overall.
That's still pretty good.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. If somebody went, let's watch this again, I wouldn't be like, no.
Oh, well, that's good. I'm glad I haven't completely turned you off old Who.
No, absolutely not. And so when I did start watching classic Who, my intention was to try and watch one from each Doctor at least. That was kind of, I thought logically, I was like, I'll never watch it all, I don't think, or at least not kind of in a straight line of kind of chronological.
No, that's a big commitment.
Well, precisely. And it doesn't all exist, so.
No.
So there's no point in trying to be a completionist with my logic. But it's kind of it's stirred me up to maybe go back to that and see if I can find. So I'm going to try and see if I can find, you know, maybe the best story in each of the Doctors, or the most well-regarded story.
Well, in between asking you to do this and coming to record, very sadly we lost Terence Dicks, who was a huge figure in the world of old Doctor Who. He was a script editor, writer, and probably best known for overseeing the Target Books range of novelizations. And one of my friends who runs another podcast, JR Southall, he does something called Strangers in Space. He introduced me to this thing called the Preference Revealer.
Ooh.
So it took what felt like years to do. So he basically input every single story from Doctor Who from 1963 right up to the present date. So this thing presents you with two choices, and you say whether you prefer one or the other, and it keeps on whittling it down and whittling it down and whittling it down. Once you've been there for about 5 hours, it eventually comes up with this comprehensive list of your favourite stories in order. And my number one story was written by Terence Dicks, and it's called Horror of Fang Rock, which is a Tom Baker.
Heard of that, yeah.
and it's fantastic. It's
So it did in fact get your preference correct.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's I've described it before, I think, as the sort of TV equivalent of comfort food. It's, you can imagine sitting down on a cold, blustery Sunday with a nice cup of hot tea, and you just sit up on the sofa, and it's absolute bliss. It's brilliant.
Okay, I'll write down horror of Fang Rock.
Yeah, I mean, there is a slightly shonky alien, but that aside, it is brilliant. Really atmospheric, and I love it to bits.
I get the impression that shonky aliens are kind of part of the joy of classic.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean about accepting things for what they are. Like, these Cybermen aren't my favourite iteration in terms of their like physical look.
Yeah.
But actually, they're there, they're doing their job, and actually it's quite funny. Like, you've got to just embrace it for what it is.
Yeah. Very much so.
Well, if people would like to suggest episodes that I should watch in my one from each Doctor very quick purview, then I will happily take advice.
Oh, excellent. Right, well, I'll put that out on our social media feeds, and we'll hopefully get a bit of response from listeners.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll go for a break now, and when we come back, we'll have a few recommendations of things that we want to share with the listeners. So back in a moment.
Perfect.
Will Doctor Who escape this time? Buy Wool's new shape Skyray with double flavors of raspberry and orange. And you get a free colour picture card, one of a series showing Doctor Who and the Space Raiders battling with Daleks. Free when you buy Wool's new shape Skyray. Only 6 months.
Welcome back. So we're going to come to that part of the show now where we're going to look at our guest recommendations. So what have you got for us, Lindsay?
So a couple of things. I am currently revisiting the Dark Materials trilogy from Philip Pullman.
Excellent.
In excited expectation of the new televised serial that we're going to be getting. I think before Christmas.
Looks really great.
It does. I failed spectacularly to finish the first book first time I tried it.
Can I make a confession?
Yes.
I had the sort of hardback bound edition with the complete thing, the trilogy, and it sat on my bookshelf for years, and I eventually just through sheer laziness listened to the audiobook versions instead. So it looks beautiful on my bookshelf, but I've never actually read it from cover to cover.
I do love an audiobook, and I will admit that when I say I'm revisiting, I am in fact listening to them.
That's not cheating, that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, I think so. And I just I have quite a busy life, but I do listen to things most of the time, mostly to quiet the sound of my own mind. But it does mean that I've got quite a lot of space in my day for listening to that kind of stuff. So I'm enjoying that, and I'm really excited about the TV show.
Excellent.
So that's good. And I'm also super excited about the new season of The Crown.
Oh, is that coming soon?
In November.
Oh, excellent! Right. I watched the first two and I really enjoyed them. I'm not necessarily that much of a royalist, but I just find it really engrossing to watch.
Yeah, I think they're beautifully shot, and there's a compelling story at the heart of them, I think. I am slightly concerned that Olivia Colman sounds like Olivia Colman. She's clearly tweaked her accent, but underneath it all, I still think she sounds like Olivia Colman. Whereas that's awful. What's her name? No. Oh, the woman
Thingy,
who plays...
what's her name?
Thingy, the one who was playing the Queen in the first two seasons. It'll come back to me.
That's really annoying me now. Hang on.
Prelude music. So, magic is happening. There's a thing.
Talk amongst yourselves, listeners.
Yes. Oh, it's going to come back to me just as you find the answer. It's going to be
Claire
so
Foy.
frustrating. Claire Foy. While
Foy.
Claire Foy might sound like Claire Foy, I didn't know who Claire Foy was when she started.
No, I think that's a fair comment.
So I'm slightly concerned that that's going to be an issue. However, it looks beautiful.
Olivia Colman
and Olivia
is a bloody
Colman
good
is
actor,
phenomenal. She's so good. And so I am super excited about that.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to give you a couple as well. My first one is something I'm anticipating, so I haven't actually had a chance to check it out yet because it's not quite out yet. But it's by an author you might have heard of called Philip Pullman.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's called The Secret Commonwealth, and it's the second of the Book of Dust series. So that is the set in the same universe as his Dark Materials, which you are currently enjoying.
Look at that. We're like on message.
Yeah. So I don't know if have you listened or read to La Belle Sauvage, which was the first one?
No, because I'm going to try and do them like in an hour.
Okay.
So don't give me no spoilers. Spoilers free.
No, I will give you no spoilers whatsoever. What I will say is the audiobook is read by Michael Sheen, and he does an amazing job, and he's going to be reading the next one. So that's due to drop as we record in a couple of days' time. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And my other one is... again, sort of relative to when we're recording, we've just had the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road by the Beatles, and that's come out in a remixed version, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. It's really, really good.
So it's interesting. I have only kind of relatively recently discovered this is something about older, not I relatively recently discovered the joy of full albums.
Yeah.
Not to say that I hadn't listened to full albums of sort of current music, but particularly going back and listening, because I had, I had the number ones compilation from the Beatles, and I had
with a band like that where they've had all these big hit singles. The easy way to get into them and to experience it is to get a compilation, and that's, to me, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so, but things like ABBA Gold or the number ones from the Beatles or the best of Simon and Garfunkel doesn't give you the full thing. So it's things like, I went and listened to the entirety of Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, it's beautiful. It's like an absolute piece of art. So I'm trying quite hard to listen to actual albums.
It's one of the things I think we sadly, in one way, we've gained something by the way digital works, because you've got this massive volume of stuff that you can explore and experience, and I think that's brilliant. As a kid, it would have blown my mind to think I could just listen to thousands of different artists just at a click of a button. But it does make you slightly more sort of, you're picking rather than getting that full experience. So like you say, listening to an album all the way through is quite a rare thing these days. But I think certainly something like Pink Floyd that you mentioned there, I mean, it lends itself to that experience because it's designed to be listened to in that way. And I think stuff like my personal two favourites from the Beatles are Abbey Road and Revolver, and they'll have songs that you're familiar with if you've had those compilations, but you get some deeper cuts that you won't have heard before that give you perhaps a slightly different idea of what they're all about, and I love them. I think they're great. So yeah, that's my other recommendation.
That sounds exciting. It's interesting. We speak about the advantages and disadvantages of how we're consuming media these days. I think, like, I love a podcast. For obvious reasons. But it is also, I'm increasingly becoming aware of the fact that as we stop listening to radio and start editing our own podcast kind of list, it's much easier to kind of control what it is you're consuming.
Yeah.
So now I don't listen to the shows I don't like, because why would I? They don't get into the podcast.
It does mean that you're potentially missing out on something that you might have stumbled across had you been listening to the radio. Yeah,
and just, sometimes you choose not to listen to things that are difficult. Whereas actually, if it's a 15-minute show that comes up on the radio, that you might be willing to kind of suffer through that and actually learn from it. So I think that's quite interesting, just as a kind of another back and forth.
Yeah. The other thing I've been immersed in recently is cabin pressure, because my son is getting to that age now where he's starting to hear them and enjoy them. So it does mean that we've listened to Ottery St Mary, Eva Tonlebin, and Xinjiao multiple times, but to me that's perfectly okay because I really enjoy them.
Well, precisely, really moving a piano and building snowmen, and all of these things are good.
And dragon fruit.
And dragon fruit. You know what? That's one of those moments where I'm like, why would nobody else in the cabin just say dragon fruit? We're just going to listen to
because
Arthur
it's funny.
It is very funny.
Yeah.
I will give you that.
Yeah.
I have
I love
actually
this.
recommended the entirety of Cabin Pressure to somebody else because it's just delightful. It's just
They are
wonderful.
brilliant. Yeah,
And
and
we
I
need
can
those
listen to
things.
them so many times, and it just never gets old.
Yeah, it's interesting because I reach for certain things. Like I joke that I have like a summer album and a winter album that are like my go-tos when I'm like I just need something and I can't decide what in terms of music. So in the winter I listen to there's a Dire Straits compilation.
Okay, yeah.
In the summer it's a Simon and Garfunkel compilation. That's like my seasonal listening kind of choices. But I often find myself coming back to things like Cabin Pressure when I'm overwrought by political nonsense.
Yeah, no, it's a nice escape from, because it's very easy to get caught up in, particularly if you're on social media. It's, it can get quite depressing just seeing the state of the world. So if you just want to step away from that for a while and just sit down and spend 25 minutes, half an hour just being entertained, then I don't think you can go too far wrong with that.
Absolutely not. And sometimes you have to make decisions for your mental health. So for example, like I love I think Margaret Atwood is an incredible author, and particularly The Handmaid's Tale is an incredible work. But I was kind of sitting there in the bookshop looking at a copy of the Testaments being like, I just don't think I can. I just don't think I can. And partly I think for me there's a real fear that The Handmaid's Tale is so beautifully crafted, and for me so much of the value in it is what she doesn't say. What we actually get is comparatively little. And there are these huge gaps where you don't get given the details on some of how this happened. You don't get all of the details anyway. And there's a bit of me that's like, but what if it's not as good? And that'll be even worse because I'll put myself back in that horrible space. And this will be disappointing on multiple levels. So I'm going to take a little gap.
I think you're going to have to take the plunge sooner or later.
I will. I'm sure I will. But I'm going to give it a little while first, I think. Just because in the meantime, I'm going to watch The Crown and listen to Cabin Pressure and Doctor Who.
Sounds pretty good to me, yeah.
Other things that I can
go to your happy place.
Indeed, that's it, exactly.
Well, thank you ever so much for coming back on again. It's been a real pleasure to have you along.
That's all. Thank you so much for having me and for picking such a delightfully good episode.
Oh, thanks very much. If you have enjoyed listening to this show, if you happen to listen through Apple Podcasts, if you'd be really kind and just go along and give it a review. You don't have to give it 5 stars, even 4 stars. I'd be quite happy with that. And just pop some details in. That'd be amazing. And you can find us on all the usual platforms. We're also on Twitter and Facebook, so just search for Nerdology UK and you'll find us there. Anything you want to give a plug to before you disappear, Lindsay, or are you all...
Nothing very exciting, I'm afraid. However, do offer me opinions on what you would suggest I watch in terms of Classic Who, and you can find me on Twitter at LHA_again.
Excellent. Right, as soon as we finish recording, I'll get straight on and ask for some recommendations.
I'm going to regret this, I suspect.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay.